Hello everyone, Yahweh here. This is volume 6 of the Secret Yahweh tapes. Want to again thank Prince for his hospitality in hosting us here in Chanhassen. Couldn't be a nicer host, a more gracious host than the way we've been treated, certainly, in our 2 days here. We had an interesting kind of powwow last night. Talked about, kind of what their follow-up questions and listening to me record these sessions have been. And a lot of them seem to center around the planets from which my peers come, and myself. I am from a planet called Ibanya, would be the translation. Ibanya is near the center of the galaxy. It is very heavily forested, and we pride ourselves in being benevolent teachers of the universe. We look basically human. We have always been in the business of helping humanity, and on Earth we've been known sometimes as Urantian, and has been foretold by your people that before the end times we will manifest before humanity, before you guys destroy yourselves, and try to help. Tifi was also from my planet, from Ibanya. We didn't know each other on the home world. It's not a huge population, but it's certainly not a small place, and she's much younger than I am. The other thing that Vince and Prince were asking me was, basically how old am I? And we figured it out. In Earth years, I would be about 117,000 years old. And that was kind of fun to throw that number out. By my species equivalent, I would be middle-aged, I guess. Still a young man, but certainly an adult. Nia, who was the astronomer in our group sent to the Mayans, was from a planet called Guno. On Earth, his people are typically known as the Orions, tall, dark-haired, brown eyes, have malevolent, warlike personas, keepers of the heavens. They actually sometimes keep other species from attacking Earth and other places. The people from Guno, like Nia, are a very complicated race of beings. They get a bad rap because they have been involved in a lot of wars. But just like Sunsi's people, and Namo's people, the Arcturians from Arctura, they are involved a lot of times in resolving conflicts, hopefully before they break out into all-out war. Now, Nia, his family was, they grew up flying amongst the stars. They knew our galaxy like the back of our hand. I met a couple of people from Guno in Detroit in 1914, and I call them people because they are very humanoid, much like me, much like you. And we'll get into that with the ancients in just a moment. But it was interesting to talk to them because they were part of Nia's clan, and they knew Nia. They didn't know he was here. They were going to go and see him. But listening to them discuss flying around the galaxy would be like someone talking about, going to the different places in their respective neighborhood. That's how well these individuals knew the topography, the stellar topography of our galaxy. Now, Locaire, who was the third of our group and who was sent to Atlantis and then later moved to the Azores and then finally settled in France, where he is today. Locaire is one of the ancients from Han. They were probably, as far as I know it, the first interstellar species to come to Earth. They taught humankind by myth the ability to grow crops and organize communities, and all the records that exist from the first age, from the age of the first sun, from Delta Sol, from Earth, are what we have from the ancients. The ancients taught Earthlings how to organize into communities and grow crops, about agriculture and animal husbandry. And they're connected a lot in ancient times of this age, of the Fifth Age, to the Phoenicians and ancient Egypt, and they're referenced in the Bible. And Han is an amazing planet to visit. Han is the oldest place I've ever been that's inhabited by a sentient species that you can go to and explore. The ancients are much older than even my species. Their planet is not near the center of the galaxy, which is unusual in a galactic sense. Typically, species whose homeworlds who evolved on planets near the center of the galaxy, like mine, like Ibanya and Tifi, where the gravity is so much more dense, I guess would be the way to describe it. Time moves slower, we age slower. The Han is a planet that is from here on the other side of the galaxy. The ancients have played a pivotal role in the development of humankind, and they were involved in all aspects of cultural development during the first age. Now, again, as I've said before, that is because theirs are the records that exist. Other things could have happened, but I am not privy to that knowledge. Now, Sunsi and Namo was sent to Africa. He's a cultural anthropologist like me, went to Timbuktu, spent a lot of time with the Dogon tribe. And Sunsi, who was sent to China, who was a military expert. Kind of different paths those they had taken through their lives, but very interesting beings. Edgar Cayce spoke a lot of the Arcturians, and he called them the most advanced beings in the galaxy with the ability for dimensional travel. Their society was very similar to that of Earth. They're, by all accounts, kind of known for their ability to bring peace to warring planets. And a lot of people throughout time have throughout history, our history, have said that those from Arctura may have actually inhabited Earth before humans became a sentient species during their first age. I don't know if that's the actual case or not. Neither Namo nor Sunsi have ever been able to clarify that for me, and we've spent a lot of time discussing it. Namo in particular, as a cultural anthropologist, knows a lot about the people of Earth. Sunsi, as a military strategist, has incredible insights as to, I guess especially in our time here that we've been on Delta Sol, Sunsi has had incredible insights as to how to assist us in negotiating our respective conflicts in which we've been involved over the years. And I think our track record speaks for itself, with very few exceptions. Now, there were times throughout your history that your powers that be here, mainly for economic reasons, to stimulate certain economies or certain regions around the globe, have started conflict that have turned into all-out war. But we have negotiated, for every one war, we have negotiated away 99 others. Now, Hunya, who was the astrologist in our group, who was sent to the Peruvian mountains to live with the Incans, is Lemurian, is what Earthlings typically refer to these people as, or these species as. I always call them people. And folks, the reason I say people is because that's an Earth-adapted term that I have picked up to refer to humanoids. I have never been one to ever use in my entire existence anything that would be considered racist or bigoted speech. I dislike it to my very core. There was one particular YouTuber that was having correspondence with me through Vince from a country that is, I hate to say, kind of known for their racist views. And I ceased conversation, ceased correspondence with this woman because of some of the things that she said regarding not only the apartheid situation. I just gave it away, I guess, didn't I? But also some family members and their sexuality. Now, Lemurians, they're from a planet that is called Lemur. They are a humanoid species. Some people here have said they hail from Pleiades, and that is not true. They are from a planet called Lemur. It's near Pleiades, though. They're humanoids. They've dark hair, kind of an olive skin, usually brown eyes. Supposedly, the earthly legends go that they settled in the Middle East. That's not true. They settled anywhere they'd like, but they do enlighten the consciousness. Hunya his people have been here on Earth for a long time in various capacities. Because of the vibrant natural resources of what they call Terra, Earth. They also refer to it as Delta Sol. You'll hear the term Terra, Terrans, spoken a lot even in science fiction. I hear it as people from Earth. That is an actual fact. That is what your people, humans from Earth, are referred to by many species in the galaxy. I always knew your planet as Delta Sol, but Terra is a equivalent substitute, as is Earth. There are several groups of people around the globe who claim to be channeling Lemurian messages of peace. I would not be surprised if this is the case. The people from Lemur can be telepathic and empathic if they so choose. Their understanding of astrology, the alignment of planets and stars throughout the galaxy, is so extensive, and their centers of learning are able to, I don't want to say predict the future or show people the future, because that's not an entirely accurate statement, but it's very close. And they are completely nice, cool. Just a species that very welcoming. And the reason is because they can see, so to speak, into the future. They don't have a lot of fear and apprehension in their dealings with other species. They'd see the problem before it was coming, is the kind of the old phrase. Now, Awa was from Pleiades. Pleiadians are human-looking but very strong and handsome and Nordic-looking, I've heard them described. Awa, an expert on survival, I believe the father of the Inuit peoples. If you've ever been to northern Canada and spent time with the Inuit peoples there, they're very much like the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. Interesting. Two completely opposite sides of your planet can share so many common cultural core beliefs. Awa's people, the Pleiadians, have had a lot of involvement on Earth over the millennia, and they've sometimes been accused of wrongdoing by others. They've sometimes been associated with the Greys, who I'll get into later. The Greys and the Pleiadians, I believe, have similar interests, only in that they look at Earth as kind of, in a lot of respects, and I say this with respect, a giant science experiment. Now, Yajweh has an interesting story. Yajweh is from a planet called, the translation would be Crotia, Croatian peoples or species. A couple of these species exist, a couple of different genuses. The humanoid species descended as refugees from the Lyran Wars, as you call them. They work closely with refugee colonists now living on Lemur or on the remnants of Pleiades. And they look human. They're known to be gentle and peaceful, but they can go one way or another. Either like Yajweh, the absolute most benevolent being you would ever come across, or like who you will refer to in years to come as the Antichrist here on Earth. Crodians at birth are put through a series of tests that determine where they go for learning and how they're brought up. The idea in the old days was for their people to retain balance by having extreme polarity within their culture. You were assigned to one side or the other, and you went the extreme in that direction. That broke down as both sides reached heights of, I guess, advancement or evolution. They evolved to such pure good and such pure evil on the other side that there became conflicts that I can't really even describe. They were happening on almost a tearing the fabric of the spiritual fabric of their planet. It's very difficult to describe that. And the Antichrist from Crodian, we always called Yeshua Denal. Yeshi hated that they shared the first or the same name. Denal is just a Nibiru word meaning opposite. And we always said that because Yeshua was, there was a lot known about what Yeshi would have to do here and what would happen to him from the Akashic record. And the ancients on Han, Locair's people, they're the ones who have probably the best understanding of the Akashic record. And so Locair, it was very hard for Locair to work with Yeshua. There was a time when I don't want to say they didn't get along, because Yeshi doesn't really not get along with anybody, but Locair had always heard the legends of the Yeshua Denal and didn't much like, I guess, what those legends entailed. We always functioned from the paradigm that, we are masters of our own destiny, and we have the ability to affect change. The future is not set in stone. The future is gray, and the black or white is colored in as we go. It's another planet worth mentioning that we spoke of last night and that I wanted to bring up today is the planet of Lupon Ro. Lupon Ro is near Han. It is where the ancients first went off-world and set up basically temples. The priests of Lupon Ro, it's a very small moon. I guess it would be small planet moon, that type thing would be the way to describe it in earthly terms. I was able to go there as a relatively young man when I was given the Nodox Kwai, my father's small piece of wood that was, I always described it in modern day times as shaped like a marshmallow, kind of an elongated marshmallow with a hole drilled through the middle. A piece of very ancient wood from my world, from Ibanya. And the Nodox Kwai was instrumental for me in negotiating a dispute that the people of my world actually had with the trees. There was a lot of fires for a time. There was some intense weather activity. Earth is the only place I've ever been, by the way, where people have actually tried to tinker with the weather. I can't believe how foolish that is. On a quantum level, looking at it from a pure physics standpoint, you have no idea what your outcome is going to be. My gosh, some of the things that humans do sometimes with their technologies make people like me nervous, let's say. But by using the Nodox Kwai, I was able to negotiate peace between my people and the ancient trees of our world, who are very much a part of our existence. We have a symbiotic relationship with them. And it was called the truce, or the peace at Nodox Kwai. And the reason they called it this was we met at the grove that this little key, I've always referred to it as a key, kind of a translator, like in that book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like a babble fish. Yes, thanks. Vince just hollered that. I don't know if you could hear that. And because of I was able to do this, and let me tell you that story really quickly. What had happened was there had been a lot of fires, and my brother had been charged, who had taken over in my father's stead when he passed. Had initiated a program of what you would call controlled burns to keep some of the more ancient groves from falling victim to fire on my world. Fire is it's the thing that we battle. Just like on Earth, I don't know if there's an equivalent here. I just started thinking, I don't know if there is an equivalent here. I was able to negotiate lines in the sand, so to speak, lines that would not be crossed, and my family was highly honored by my people. It's interesting because Tifi's aunt was the woman who gave me the award, but we didn't know each other at the time. But I was brought to Lupon Row afterwards, and within the walls of the Great Temple, I was given a gift. And that gift was bestowed upon me by the laying on of hands by a quorum of 12 priests. And they gave me the gift to see both sides. That's the easiest way I can describe it. That's why I'm such a good arbitrator. That's why I'm such a good negotiator, is because I can see and feel my way through very tangled webs that other beings might get hung up on. And when the emperor, before he became the seventh emperor of Nibiru, met me, he asked me all the time what I would do in certain situations. And I'm not saying that I in any way taught His Highness anything, because that would be disrespectful. But I think that's why I was made, have now been made, director of the Delta Soul Project and special envoy to His Majesty, the 7th Emperor of Nibiru, whose names cannot be written, Lord of the Anunnaki. And that's the actual formal greeting. You'd say His Majesty, the 7th Emperor of Nibiru, whose names cannot be written, Lord of the Anunnaki. My, I guess, official title, I guess, I just thought of this, I may have been dubbed a prophet and not even really been aware of it. And I don't say that with any disrespect to any earthly religion. I say that completely in relation to the ways of my people. I look forward to my return to Abanya. It's impossible for me really to have much communication there. The lines to Nibiru were cut off for a time, and I received word from home relayed through the palace. But part of us going on this mission was that we could not be corrupted by news of what was going on. That's why it's been so difficult for me over these last 3,500 years. Excuse me. I gotta take a sip of my Kool-Aid. Oh, orange Kool-Aid today. Orange Kool-Aid is so good. Love it. Where was I? Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Oh, Vince and Prince are really getting a kick out of that. Thanks, guys. I never really had a lot, I guess. I never had a lot of expectation going into this mission. We 9 were chosen in class, I guess chosen for that class specifically by Emperor 7 with what he had in mind for us to do. We've gotten here at different times. We've seen each other over the years, with the exception of Awa, and we've, kind of on and off been in different states of working together. And now that I think Yeshu's coming back, there's a chance for we 9 to get together. Now, what would have to happen for this to work is all 9 of us would have to be at a space or place in what you would call Afghanistan. I don't want to say anything more than that. I think that alone should tell you how difficult this feat would be, to get 9 of us into Afghanistan, up into the hills. There's a large cave in the mountains of Afghanistan. I believe that's vague enough to not give anything away. With the ruins of a very ancient civilization from the Second Age of Earth, the realm of the Second Sun, excuse me. And during the time of the Second Sun, they had built this subterranean underground civilization. They've all since perished. But there is a device there that can actually, what's the best way to term this? Brainwash people, I guess. I think that's accurate. It reprograms the human mind with a specific set of instructions. And there are dials around this device, large stone circular rings that interlock, that are very fluid. They move around very easily. And by aligning these, there's, I don't know how many different combinations, millions, and putting a person in the center on this altar, it looks like, that can be reprogrammed. And the 9 of us together each have a piece of what would be required to operate this device. Now, the only way that this would ever possibly happen, at least right now in the foreseeable future, is for the Taliban that the U.S. is battling against, and the United States, who those two factions control this area, neither of whom I think are aware of the existence of this. I'm 99.9% certain of that. I would have heard something. They would have to agree to let us in, and they would have to guarantee our safety, and it would have to be guaranteed on a very high level. Throughout the millennia, the way our safety has been guaranteed when we have to do something similar to this is that the people who could, effectively hurt us or protect us, or, who they would have control over our health and safety. They will give us, people who work with us, members of their family will come and stay with them. We would never hurt anybody intentionally. The idea is that they are not going to allow anything to happen to us when their wives and children and loved ones and right-hand people are being held by people who work with us. And they're actually humans that work with us on these type of projects. That's a big division of the powers that be, is kind of their covert ability to abduct and detain people in secret prisons throughout your planet. This is not done, believe it or not, kind of on a, there's no madmen running your world. I guess that depends on your definition of madmen, but there's kind of a committee that meets and decides if somebody needs to be taken off the streets. Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks guy, he's going to roll out a bunch of stuff on U.S. cables, is what the word on the street is. But the one that he's really got in the hopper is some information on HSBC, Bank of America, large banks, J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, some of their internal documents that are going to really damage the global infrastructure financially. And I would assume that he would be removed before that happens. I don't think they'll care about the U.S. cables. The U.S. government has become so fragmented that I don't think it's used as much as it was a few decades ago by the quote-unquote powers that be to channel power and channel decisions throughout the globe. Now, in saying that, I understand that the U.S. is the only remaining superpower right now, but China and Russia are barking at their heels, and indeed China over the next 2 years before 2012. By the time 2012 rolls around, December 21st, 2012, the date that everyone always asks about, the balance of power will have shifted now, or at that time, in the direction of China, and it will be clear to everyone. In November of 2010, the global tipping point is what it's called, or commonly referred to. People were looking for some kind of a huge event, stock market crash or a terrorist attack or something. And a tipping point is not, by definition, a huge event. A tipping point is where something reaches its momentum, ceases in one direction, and begins moving back in the other direction, like a pendulum when it reaches its apex. And this tipping point is moving power away from the U.S. and into China. And Sun Tzu's military there in China is ready to go, by all accounts. The Chinese military are not going to mess around. They are going to take Sun Tzu's teachings to heart, and I believe the U.S. and even Russia will have to play along, and basically they will agree to no military conflict before it even gets going. The Chinese army is nothing that would ever want to be messed with by any Western power. I think that's pretty common knowledge. I don't think that's me revealing any confidential information. When I worked with the CIA and the NSA back in the 90s, on Project Red Rocks, it was interesting to me because the United States has within its ranks compartmentalized, and again, it's very fragmented. One side literally doesn't know what the other side is doing, for good cause. But their understanding of alien technology seems to rely a lot on militaristic species. I had heard them speaking of a species that they referred to. They called it draconian, and at first I thought they were speaking of like draconian times, or that as a broad description. And they actually had assigned draconian to a species of extraterrestrial humanoids that they believed were trying to take over the planet Earth. And they began kind of, I think, leaning towards this animosity towards extraterrestrial intelligences. Some of them knew who I was, really, and what my purpose was there, and my story, so to speak, and some didn't. Some just knew me as a astrophysicist from Columbia University that was there on special assignment. And for a long time, I spent a long time at Columbia working as a professor in astrophysics. And a lot of people ask me, why Columbia? And I'll tell you why. It's because I didn't like Oxford. That was where I was originally. And I specifically chose Columbia because I wanted to experience the bohemian culture firsthand that was going on there in the 80s, late 70s, early. I'd heard about it during the 60s. And let me stop right here, please, guys. Let me stop and sidetrack. I know I do this all the time, I know. I want to talk about Jimi Hendrix. I want to talk about Jimi Hendrix for a couple of reasons. Number one is because when Prince was starting out, Prince and I met in the late 70s in New York. And I knew Prince very well before everything broke for him and he got huge in 84 with Purple Rain. He's blushing. Ever seen a black man blush? Yeah, butterscotch, I gotcha. He and I hit it off very well because I like to stay up very late and go to all the after shows. Bands would have concerts at a kind of a larger venue, and then they would go to a smaller club and play a lot of blues and jazz and more quiet music that I like. And he and I had a lot of conversations about Jimi Hendrix because I had first come to that area of New York City because of my association with Jimi in the late 60s. And that's what made me want to live there. And, I'd heard all these things about different things, and I always said I wanted to live there, and I decided I was going to apply to be a professor at Columbia. I lived in London during the late 60s, and when Jimi died in 1970 on September 18th, I left, and I've never been back since. I've never been to London since. It's a nice city, but there's a lot of very bad people in London. Londoners, please, I mean no disrespect to you. I'm sure you're nice, but London has a lot of people who are very motivated by money and greed, and I found that not to be of my liking. But I began telling Prince about different things Jimi had done with the guitar, and I feel like and I'm saying this with respect, my friend, feel like I got to influence his music a little bit with those times that we spent listening to the old LPs, the old vinyl, and messing around in the hotel rooms. Not sexually. Vince's eyebrows just went up. No, messing around with playing music, not anything else. I guess I would be considered asexual. Is that the term? I have no interest in your species in that way. Tiffy and I had a thing that I will probably not get into ever, but I like only the women from my home world. When I first met Jimi Hendrix, I had gone to a concert. He was opening up for a band called the Monkees, and Jimi Hendrix was really tripping balls out on LSD. He had taken a lot of that drug, and I was deciding I was going to mess with him. We were backstage, and he was kind of quiet. He was a very quiet, kind of shy guy. He was a lot like, I've told Prince this a lot of times, reminded me a lot of Prince, because on stage, these guys go crazy and do all these different things, but you sit down and hang out with them, and they're very quiet and reserved and very humble, just decent, normal people. And Jimi was tripping, and I decided to go over and talk to him, and I started talking to him about UFOs and flying saucers and aliens, and he started talking back to me like we were having a whole conversation about it. I wasn't messing with him at all, in other words. He was very much aware of UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrials and the different things, and he was tripping like mad. It was obvious he was, hallucinating. He kept waving his hand and saying tracers and things like that. And he still was able to carry on a very lucid conversation with me about extraterrestrial intelligences. And we spent some time together when he worked on his second record, Axis Bold as Love, I think it was called. Is that what it was? And then he went to New York to work on Electric Ladyland, and we kind of went our separate ways. And I was in London when he died. And Jimi Hendrix, if any of you ever hear anybody say Jimi Hendrix committed suicide or died of a drug overdose, will you please smack them upside the head and correct their mistake? Let me tell you what happened. Jimmy was with his girlfriend, and they had been drinking. And Jimmy had a lot of Jimmy never did heroin. I never saw him do heroin, but he'd been busted with heroin, and he mashed up a hotel room in Stockholm, I think, or Sweden, and he had a lot of legal troubles going on at the time. The band, he was kind of reorganizing his band. Jimmy wanted to stop playing as a solo psychedelic rock musician and start writing. He wanted large, like, symphonies of electric guitars, and he had some really cool ideas. Jimmy had really gotten into music theory at that time, and that was kind of balanced against all the negative stuff that was going on in his life with these drugs were not his. I firmly believe that. They were somebody associated with him who had thought they could sneak him through customs by shoving him into his bag because they thought because he was a star he wouldn't be searched, is my theory. But Jimmy's girlfriend at the time had some sleeping pills, and Jimmy had taken one of them because he was stressing out, and they were drinking wine that day and probably smoking a lot of really kind marijuana. And Jimmy got too drunk and took too many of these sleeping pills, which were much stronger than something you would have been able to get in the U.S., and basically passed out. Now, his girlfriend couldn't wake him up. She called his manager, said, "Hey, I can't wake Jimmy up." He said, "Call the police. Call the fucking ambulance." I don't like to swear, but that's what he said, is call the fucking ambulance right now. She hung up the phone. She went down and got a pack of smokes from the corner store. She comes back. Jimmy had thrown up. She calls back the manager. The manager says, "Did you call?" She says, "No." He says, "I'm on his way." By the time the ambulance gets there, Jimmy's passed out. He's been vomiting. He's drunk, and he's sedated on these very powerful sleeping pills, and that combined with the alcohol was slowing his heart. The paramedics put him on a stretcher on his back. They didn't tilt his head to one side. They didn't put him on the side. They strapped him in, face up, on his back, put him in the back of an ambulance, and drove to the hospital. During the drive, Jimmy threw up. The vomit went up into his mouth and back down into his lungs and into his esophagus, and he choked to death. He was unconscious. It was the paramedic. I don't want to assign fault. That's not typically what I like to do. But it was paramedics' error. They were so busy talking about, later I heard, they were so busy talking about, do you know who it is in the back of this ambulance? And all the people and all the girls they were going to, all the, the birds they were going to be able to bag with this story that they brought Jimi Hendrix to the hospital, that they didn't even check on him. Jimi Hendrix was a good guy. He was a good friend. And so when I went to New York in the 70s, I had a good time there, but it was always kind of bittersweet. I always wished that my friend was with me. And, in life, Jimmy said right before he died, he wrote a poem that said, "The story of life is quicker than the blink of an eye. The story of love is hello and goodbye until we meet again." And that's one of the most beautiful pieces of the English language that I've ever heard pass my ears. The story of life is quicker than the blink of an eye. The story of love is hello and goodbye until we meet again. And, I know that a lot of you are going to say I'm getting sidetracked here by talking about Jimmy, but you have to understand that Jimi Hendrix could have changed the world had he had lived. By all accounts, Locaire even told me once that Jimmy was someone whose name was... The name Hendrix appears in the Akashic Record. It's a name that's been known. It's the name I often use as my last name in my dealings with people on this planet, out of respect to my friend. Now, I'm going to take a quick break. there's about a half an hour left, I guess, on this volume, and I'm going to take a quick break and organize my thoughts and then come back. Thank you. Okay, back. The guys want me to talk about the story of the Great Flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of Noah and the Ark. Earth has experienced great floods several times during its existence. A lot of them are documented by, your scientists in your books. And the flood that took place at that time dealt with the draining of the Black Sea. The Black Sea had just reached a tipping point. It had grown too large. It was several years of heavy thaw and heavy water outflow. Had led to a bulging of that body of water, and it emptied out. And the flood of those times was a very traumatic experience, because in that part of the world, it wiped out a large portion of the population. As it's been throughout history, as it is right now, a lot of humans live near large bodies of water, whether they be lakes or in most cases the sea. You look around at densely populated areas around your planet, and here on Earth, a lot of those areas exist very near the ocean or large bodies of water, very low to sea level. Bangladesh, where I need to go next, I've got to make a stop there after I leave here, is, excuse me, I need to pause, sorry. Are we going? Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, a lot of people live near sea level, and so they're very susceptible to sea level rise and fall. They're also very susceptible to floods if they live around, what you would consider like an inland sea or a large lake. The civilization that existed in the Mediterranean during that time, very heavily concentrated near sea level, along the coastlines. Many societies that, they fished the seas for their sustenance, and relied on it for, trade and transportation, etc. So a lot of people died. And I never knew Noah as a person, but I've heard the story told several different ways, several different times. And I'm going to try to tell the story as I've heard it of the flood of Noah by combining everything that I've heard the most often and telling it in the last part of this tape of Volume 6 here. The Noah was contacted by Lemurians. Hunya told me this. The story from the Lemurians on Lemur was that Noah was contacted by one of them, appeared to in a dream, as is almost always the case. You guys will hear this as a common theme in what I talk about. When you dream at night, that is when you're very much alive while you're dreaming, right? You feel that, don't you? When you're dreaming, you're very susceptible to ideas. You can look at them from a different paradigm, literally. And Noah was told that he needed to build an ark, is the way the story goes, build a large boat, and gather species of plants and animal. And plants, he was he had a son that was very, very skilled in agriculture, a very good horticulturalist, and others that were close to him and his family that were very good with animal husbandry. And Noah was a very loved man by those around him. He was a very good father and husband, by all accounts that I've ever heard. And so when he began asking people to do this, and he began saying this, those close to him knew he was for real. And they built a giant boat. a giant boat. And I think it's the one that's on the mountain in Turkey, but Ararat. But maybe not. I've never been there, and I can't confirm that. But here's what happened. Noah and his family began gathering up animals and seedlings of plants, and they began to tell everybody they knew. And because members of Noah's family were heavily involved in trade that went through their region, Noah was able to pass this word along. Now, some people believed and some people didn't, and this is one of those cases in history, like so many others, where there really is no proof for something other than someone's gut feeling. And it's very difficult for your species to go off someone else's gut feeling. It's hard enough for you to go off your own gut feeling, but going off someone else's gut feeling is next to impossible, or impossible for some of you. I understand this. But there were some who, when they heard these warnings that this flood was coming, this rampage was coming, had been to the Black Sea and had seen how high its banks were, and had seen its bulging, and that it was ready to burst those banks and flood in. And they told others, look, this guy's talking about this, but I've actually seen this. And word went forth. And by a lot of estimates, as much as 10% of the population in affected areas survived, because they did things similar to Noah. Now, Noah's story was kind of different than the Epic of Gilgamesh for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones was that Noah sent out the dove, and that came back with the olive branch, or whatever the little twig of tree was, to let him know that they'd found land. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you translate it like I do, what happened was the survivors were attacked by another group of survivors who were less prepared than they were. They defeated the people who attacked them were weak from hunger and starvation and scurvy, and couldn't fight very well. But they led them back to Turkey, where they had come from. It was a group of, I guess, Turkish nationals. It's interesting to me because I've always had an interesting perspective on Turkey. The time I spent, when I first got here, I was sent to the Minoan civilization on Crete, and I spent a lot of time in ancient Greece. Went back there on a lot of different occasions for a lot of different things. And it's weird because I'd never really felt at home there. I always felt kind of a sympathy towards the Turks in more recent times, as the Greeks and the Turks battled against each other. Because the Greeks at times were almost obsessive in their arrogance. They really looked down in a condescending way on other peoples from time to time. And I'm not trying to be, I have a lot of very good Greek friends. I'm not trying to say anything about a people as a whole. Again, I never want to speak in bigoted terms ever against anyone, except maybe the menacing rays. Yes. The troubles going on as of late in Greece, the financial troubles, are no surprise to people like me who've witnessed their culture firsthand. There's a lot of very elite, rich people that believe firmly that they are above paying taxes or having to contribute anything to society. They've been rich for a long time. They own their own land. They're self-sufficient. They don't rely on anybody as their kind of take. Of course, the thing that guys like me like to throw out in that situation is, well, who provides for your common good, common defense? You've got to surely contribute to that. But when you've been rich for a long time, I've noticed this a lot on Earth with a lot of very rich and powerful people on this planet. When you've been very wealthy for a long time, by nature, human nature is you tend to forget what it's like to go without. And I think that a lot of people could use a dose of reality in that regard, or kind of a gut check. And my mouth is dry today. I don't know why. It's because it's so freaking cold here, you guys. Chanhassen is cold. Minnesota is cold. I think it's like Russia cold. So oh, the Noah's Ark. These guys are sitting there looking at me like, and Noah, and the moral of the story, I guess, for me, has always been, and why I've found it so interesting that different versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Noah flood story are told in different cultures, is because different societies around the globe have been wiped out or near wiped out at different times, a lot of times by tsunamis. The Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, was it, where so many hundreds of thousands of people died. That tragedy was it was almost a forgotten natural disaster by many people on Earth. It seemed people had forgotten how dangerous tsunamis can be. The people along the eastern coast of the United States have aimed at them a mountain off the coast of Africa, in part of an island that's ready to slip into the ocean. And so I thought it was very interesting that that was actually made mention of, and I saw a news report or one of your TV shows talk about that very possibility one time, and I thought, what a neat thing that myth, that story, still has relevance today for people, because that was the original intent of different civilizations and cultures throughout the different ages of Earth leading up to this, the age of the fifth sun, to always try to pass down this knowledge of, look, we went through this and we survived, and this is what we did to survive, because they knew, looking back, that up until the time of the catastrophe, very similar to what happened on Crete, now that I think of it, people after that, those that survived, very much wanted to somehow pass down the knowledge of what they did, when people said that it was coming, what did they say? They weren't just crazy street preachers that day. They actually said something that happened, and it's tough to sift through that amount of information. But the earth can be very violent at times. Mother Nature can be a real beast. And like the volcano in Indonesia that I helped out with, the Boxing Day tsunami back in 2004 that I assisted with in Sri Lanka and India. It's what I'm going to Bangladesh for. I don't want to freak anybody out too much, but there is potential within the Akashic record for a very large magnitude earthquake to occur in the Java Sea sometime in early 2011. And weird people like me who have been made aware of this possibility are doing everything we can to arrange some kind of an evacuation method for as many people as we can in Dhaka. Bangladesh is a very densely populated, very poor country who could be, Southeast Asia is very important. It's interesting to me, being in America, back in the 80s, I remember there was a lot of, buy American things were made in Japan, they always said, and then it was made in Taiwan and now made in China and things like that, or Malaysia. And a lot of Americans, I think, forget how dependent they are as a society on Southeast Asia functioning well as an economic system for their very survival. You go into your Walmart, Walmart store, Walmart, and you look, and many of the things you'll see in these big stores are brought in from overseas. A global shipping network is been in place now for a couple of decades that's very efficient. Over the last couple of years, as the economy has turned down, a lot of these ships are sitting offshore in China. You notice when they come into port in the U.S., people I know that work in these ports notice that the ships are riding a lot higher in the water than they've been in the past. And there's a real slowdown in these goods and services, or excuse me, goods, I guess. The services would be not need to be shipped. I'm getting sidetracked. Take a drink. The reason it's so important is that Bangladesh, within the Akashic record, is mentioned as a tipping point in kind of a cataclysmic chain of events in Southeast Asia. That was another reason why we were so concerned with North Korea, and continue to be to this day. Southeast Asia breaking out into war could quickly escalate into a third world war for your planet. The North Koreans do have nuclear-capable weapons. The Chinese have a nuclear arsenal that is, you only know the tip of the iceberg on that. From what Sun Tzu has said, and he doesn't, tell me much about, none of us ever reveal to each other or to other respective governments confidential information. That's why we are so trusted. That's why people like me are brought in to negotiate and arbitrate these huge disagreements, is because they know we will not reveal no matter what. We can't be tortured. We can't be bartered with. We can't be held hostage. And so we have no reason to have any preconceived biases one way or another. But the North Koreans, Kim Jong-il is looking for an excuse to attack South Korea. He wants very much to go out with a bang. Now, his son is a very troubled young man, I'll say. I'll say that, and I won't say much else. Because I actually feel sorry for the young man. I really do. His life has been a torment of expectation and trying to navigate yourself as a good human being through the sea of debauchery that is Kim Jong-il's existence there in Pyongyang is next to impossible. The South Koreans have had enough of North Korea. I would expect there to be some kind of a conflict there escalating over the next couple of months. It's a very tenuous situation. But Bangladesh is important because Bangladesh would have this huge outflux of refugees should something like this happen. There's no infrastructure in place in Bangladesh for any kind of social welfare in the place of a huge natural disaster. And aid agencies would be instantly overwhelmed. NGOs and nonprofit groups, Red Cross, etc., would not be able to handle what would happen when they're looking forward and kind of some of the projections that we've been given. And Leclerc is tied up a lot in France at CERN. He's the experiments that they have done at CERN over the last since the turn of the century, over the last 10 years, have really made some leaps and bounds as far as technology that could benefit the human race. One of the things that people are most concerned about on kind of a global conflict front is that energy is being used up faster than, in other words, you look down the road, you look at, okay, we've got this many people and we're consuming this amount of resources to grow our food and this amount of energy to heat our houses and turn the lights on, etc., power our cars and our planes. And populations are growing at this rate. And you look down the road using that math, and you see that the Earth cannot sustain population growth, sometimes as small as 50 years out in some of these models. And so what CERN has been doing is they've been trying desperately to develop power sources that are both efficient and able to be accepted by the general public. Nuclear energy is an archaic form. Nuclear fission is an archaic form of producing, high bang for your buck energy. The amount of energy that is released by something, that equation, there are ways to increase that equation to near 100%. And the work they've been doing at CERN concerning both crystalline power and alternative power sources, dealing a lot with matter and antimatter, will, I believe, greatly benefit mankind in the years to come. And they're so urgent in their task because that's one of the things that can really assist the human race, is getting off its dependence of fossil fuels, getting off its dependence on just unclean methods of energy production. Because nobody wants anybody to have to die. Everybody that exists right now on the planet, you think of your children and your family. Somebody gets, they decide they're going to have a kid or kids. Don't you wish them well? Don't you hope that those kids are happy and healthy, and you wish for your family and your son, your daughter, that they can go on and find somebody to be partnered with in life, that they feel close to, and they might choose to raise a family. And the idea is that it grows, and populations grow, and as technology increases, you're going to be living longer. Most of you have figured out by now that the secret to good life on this planet is good nutrition. In America especially, since the turn of the 19th, 20th century, a lot of the crops have been grown in soil that's been depleted of all the minerals save potassium and what's the phosphate and nitrogen? NPK. Yeah. Good nutrition is very important for you humans coming up, because you're going to have the opportunity to do things that having a nice long life will lend itself very well towards accomplishing. Sorry. You're going to be given the opportunity to go places and do things and experience things that you can't even imagine. We got 10 minutes left. Okay, I'll describe one. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Lupanro. That is kind of a satellite, a moon off the planet of Han, where the ancients live. On Lupanro, there is a thing, basically a guided tour that beings can go on. You book it kind of in advance, and I say book it because that's basically what you do. You contact them and you schedule, when in their time you will be there. And you're taken, depending on what species you are, you're taking on a different tour. It is possible for species to go on another species tour, but everything that they take you on is designed to be in your language and information relevant to your species. The exhibit, I guess you would say, or the section of Lupanro that has information on Terra, on Earth, is an amazing reproduction of the Great Pyramid and Sphinx in Giza, as they once stood. It wasn't always a pharaoh's face on the Sphinx in Giza. That's a very ancient. Those buildings there are very old, and the Sphinx was nearly, that society was wiped out and nearly destroyed by a great flood. The earth shifted and oceans moved. Oceans, can you imagine what would happen if a whole ocean was shifted? Think of the amount of dirt and sediment that would be churned up in that water, and then that would rush over large, vast swaths of land, tearing up trees, rocks. And it would be like sandblasting with grainy water at high pressure over entire landscapes. And after that happened, the Sphinx lay buried. The pyramid, only the tip poked out, as I hear the legend. And over time, because that area was just sand after that, the sand blew down to reveal the pyramids and then the stump of the Sphinx. And the Egyptians during their time dug all that back down and retrofitted the pyramids, and that's when they started building new pyramids. Now it's interesting because you go in the big pyramids, and there's not a lot of hieroglyphics. There's not a lot of stuff in there, but they're so huge. You get the feeling instantly when you go in there. Anybody who's ever been here, you know what I'm talking about. That, wow, I am, wandering through this one little passage. If this is this vast and this has this many little things that go off in all directions, and this is a huge hunk of rocks put together. How many of these things are there? The Egyptians always wanted to copy this. And Tifi, when she was there, I know, she was very instrumental in a lot of the designs and artwork on some of the late dynasty pyramids. Her influence was felt there, and it was because that she was fascinated by these, and she was the one that had told me about this area on Lupon Row. So when I got to go get my gift, after Nodokskoi, after I settled the dispute with the trees and the people of my world of Ibanya, I went to this area of Lupon Row. I got to see many different areas, and this area of Earth was fascinating because for you to be able to see as a human being what the pyramids, the great pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx were originally in its original form, will, I believe, give human beings, because of what I know of the human psyche, an instant paradigm shift, a macro understanding of the different epochs of time that have occurred over the history of your planet. Things that it will instantly make you call to mind, things that you had seen on Earth with similar changes, or similar looks of change. The look that they may have been bombarded by some huge force, covered with waste, with dirt, with sand, whatever, and then eroded over time with weather and wind, and then brought back to life somehow. It's very interesting where they chose to carve Mount Rushmore. We're in Minnesota. I would love to go see that someday and see this for myself. But where they carved out Mount Rushmore, that mountain was a sacred mountain. Can I tell the story? Do I have enough time? They say they're holding up with five fingers. I guess 5 minutes. Yes. The Native Americans held the area around Mount Rushmore very sacred. It was a place in ancient times where some of the Arcturians would come, kind of a landing pad for them to come and visit the ancient peoples of the Dakota areas in the U.S. Sorry, Prince, I banged the microphone stand. It's very interesting that they chose to build Mount Rushmore there, because that made the Arcturians very upset. It was very disrespectful. The Arcturians helped the United States solve the dispute with the Greys after Roswell in 1947. In 1947, one of the Greys' ships was doing some surveillance there at Los Alamos, the nuclear facilities, and crashed in the desert. And there was some survivors. I don't know how many there were, and I don't know how many survived and how many died exactly, because I've heard so many conflicting reports. But from the gentleman I spoke with who was out there that day, he said that the Greys were alive and that the U.S. government had taken them prisoner. And the Greys were furious. And the Greys are really, really not fun to have mad at you, to put it lightly. And the Arcturians were able to put aside their dispute with the U.S. government, the representatives of the U.S. government.